The following video is sponsored by Cotner Funeral Home. In 1926, historical author and African-American historian Carter G. Woodson heavily promoted the need for a Black History Week. Though Carter was born to a poor family and self-taught himself everything up until high school level education, he rose to be the second African-American in history to earn a doctorate and published works which explored the history of African-Americans. The week of February 12th and 13th would become the week Carter Woodson would dedicate to Black history. He saw the week as an opportunity to study the history of African American, a history he thought either wasn't published enough or was suppressed by educators across the country. Those 7 days were chosen in particular because of the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. This week would soon become a month on many college campuses and evolve to be recognized by President Gerald Ford.
Flash forward to 2018, and this same annual occurrence still stands as a way to empathize with and celebrate the struggles of African Americans. Here at ThisisReynoldsburg, we want to join such occasions by celebrating the history of African Americans as it relates to Reynoldsburg. Such a study begins with an illustrated look at African American history in Reynoldsburg.
The mural painted on the side of Cotner Funeral Home represents the collective history of the city by providing meaningful symbols of the past. Two of these symbols speak directly to the hardships and sacrifices that African Americans in Reynoldsburg went through. The first of these was a Civil War veteran by the name of George Stabot. He served in Company E, 5th United States Colored Infantry, and passed during the war. He is now buried in the Seceder Cemetery behind Bibi Bop and Plato's Closet on State Route 256, where other veterans from the Revolutionary War, War of 1812, the Mexican War, and of course the Civil War still remain.
Formed in Delaware, Ohio, George's company served in a wide capacity during the Civil War. They saw duty in Virginia and North Carolina, as well as the Richmond-Petersburg campaign and many other high-stakes conflicts. The bravery of African Americans saw almost 185,000 of them volunteer in the Civil War. George Stabot, a Reynoldsburg resident, was no exception to this.
The second of these symbols, a fictional African American family running with materials in hand, was painted to represent the ties Reynoldsburg has to the Underground Railroad. For Ohio, being a state that had 5 borders and access to Canada, meant it was often used by runaway slaves in the late 1700s and well into the 1800s to reach free lands. Cities in central Ohio were ones which often helped this cause, labeled the Underground Railroad. Reynoldsburg in particular had many stops along the infamous trail. The David Graham House, Alexander Livingston Seed Farm, as well as a cave off of Main Street near Wagner Road were just some of the many places slaves would hide. Not only were Reynoldsburg residents brave enough to house what would then be known as contraband by the US government, many transported these slaves to help them get to another stop along the Underground Railroad. For instance, Alexander Livingston's employee, Benjamin Patterson, was known to haul slaves to their next destinations in Granville or even Mount Vernon. Many other residents were involved in such work, and many in Reynoldsburg considered themselves to be abolitionists, or those who didn't support slavery. But where did all this history come from? And how do we know so much information about the Underground Railroad as it connects to Reynoldsburg? Much of that credit goes to Cornelia Parkinson and the work done at the Reynoldsburg-Truro Historical Society.
So in the chase for even more information, we're going to be talking to the Historical Society about the Underground Railroad and Reynoldsburg's role in that monumental piece of history.
Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and check in for content uploaded weekly.